So, a little bit of background. Yumi the Nightmare Painter. I heard a little bit about what Yumi the Nightmare Painter was about. And I thought to myself, that does not sound interesting. I don't know if I want to read a romance story from Brandon Sanderson, because his romance has not been the parts of his books that I gravitate towards or that I'm most invested or interested in. Yumi and the Nightmare Painter is the second of his secret projects. I finished reading Tress of the Emerald Sea on last Friday, so I can't remember what the date was and I'm not going to bother counting back. 17th, Friday the 17th. So I finished reading Tress on the 17th, and I looked up Yumi on the library system, and I saw that my local library had a copy. And I just had this urge. I was like, you know what? I loved reading Tress so much. Like, I really love Tress. You see my review that posted last week, if this is posted on the same schedule as I currently have it planned to post. I posted a review last week of Tress of the Emerald Sea, which you'll notice I'm wearing the same clothes because I recorded these back to back. I loved it so much that I was like, I want to read another secret project. I'm going to read Yumi the Nightmare Painter. And I managed to pick up the physical copy from my local library. Thank you very much, Somerset Library System. It's incredible that you have, use your libraries. Everyone, use your library. So look at this amazing cover as well. Like, look how gorgeous that is. It's such an improvement on Sanderson's old style UK covers. If he does this style for every Sanderson book going forward, I might start collecting hardcovers. That's all I'm going to say. So, Yumi and the Nightmare Painter. What's it about? It is a romance. However, I would say that while the relationship between the characters is probably the central story of this book, the kind of the background is basically Yumi is a Yokihijo, which is a kind of like chosen one priestess sort of character, and she basically has to summon spirits because and the spirits can then she can convince them to transform into things that make the lives of the people who live in the villages that she's the priestess of easier. So, for example, she can transform them into light orbs, similar to how they use Stormlight as light in the Stormlight Archive. She can transform them into like light orbs, and then she can give them to people to light their homes, for example. So Yumi can do that, and Painter, whose name is Nikaro, is what's called a nightmare painter. So in his world, these shadowy, like glob-like beings that are like these horrifying monsters creep into the city at night and drain the like life force out of people, and they can only be sent back out to the darkness that surrounds his world, which is kind of like a miasma mist sort of thing that's kept back from the cities by this kind of electrical thing that is pink and blue called Heon. And sorry, I'm just going to put my drink down. And so he's this nightmare painter, and the painter's job is to protect the people of this city. And there's a lot of them. They're like a kind of like fantasy pest control almost. So they go around and they get rid of these nightmares, and the way they get rid of them is by painting them. So they carry around like a big canvas and they paint them with ink and a giant paintbrush that's like as long as a person, like a bow staff paintbrush. Very, very cool visual. Conceptually, extremely cool. The Sanderson says in the postscript that he wanted to explore jobs that are incredibly fantastical and magical, from our point of view that are very mundane and ordinary in the fantasy worlds that they inhabit. And I think that he's done a really great job at that. I think Yumi's job as the priestess and Painter's job as a painter um, is genuinely really interesting, and I loved the concepts behind them both. And I really liked how much time and energy we see. Time and energy, and so how much time we spend in Painter's world exploring a world where these painters are part of the framework of society. Um, yeah, I just thought that was really, really good and really well done. Um, this book, so basically what happens is, so Yumi has her kind of sacred duty, Painter has his sacred duty, and what happens is they start to body swap. So one day, Painter wakes up and he's in Yumi's body, and then another day, Yumi wakes up and she's in Painter's body, or in Painter's place, as it were. And so they both have to learn to take part in the rituals and the societies of the other. It's very, very similar to the movie Your Name by Makoto Shinkai. But instead of Where Your Name, they have to like communicate via leaving messages for each other. In Yumi and the Nightmare Painter, the person whose body it is kind of like disembodied and like a ghost almost as part of the in the room, and they can like see and talk with the person inhabiting the body. So, for example, Painter wakes up in Yumi's body, and Yumi's kind of spirit is there, and she can guide him through her life and tell him how to be a priestess. And her life is kind of this rigid and very, her life is very, very rigid, and it's bound in rituals and all this sort of stuff. Really interesting, genuinely really interesting. We spend a lot of time in Yumi's world learning how to do Yumi's thing, and in Painter's world learning how to do Painter's thing. I would almost say too much time. This book starts out a little slower than Tress. It took me quite a few chapters to get invested, whereas with Tress I think I was invested in like a page of the book. Yumi and the Nightmare Painter, I had to read 2 or 3 chapters from each point of view to really, really get invested in the characters. And I think that I think I got really invested in Yumi quite early on, and how interesting her world was and how different it was. They have this really cool kind of dichotomy where Painter's world is in shadow. It's dark all the time, and cities are surrounded by this miasma. And then in Yumi's world, it's light all the time, and they have the sun on their world is so hot that you can like cook food on the earth because it's that hot. And they can't walk barefoot on the ground, for example. They have to wear like I think they're described as like 4-inch tall shoes. Really, really interesting. Lots of good world building here. I don't think that off the back of Tressa MLT, I think the world building was a little simpler. Painter's society, for example, is basically just modern day society, with a few, I would say 20th century society, if not modern day. They have TV, for example. They have vending machines. They have soap operas. They have magazines. They have all this sort of stuff. They have what is basically electricity, in the form of this Heon, which is kind of the purple and magenta lines that protect their civilization, but also power it. So they're very reliant on this Heon substance. There's so much to talk about with these books in terms of characters and the society, you don't see much outside of Yumi and Painter. You meet quite a few characters in Painter's world, and you meet a couple in Yumi's. But it does feel kind of like Sanderson is a bit more invested in Painter, or at least in Painter's world, for example. Maybe he's more invested in Yumi because you spend, obviously, because they swap bodies, you spend more time following Yumi in Painter's world than I think the other way around. Painter's world is obviously a lot more expansive as well because it's a whole, capital city versus Yumi's world, which is a small village. There's a lot of really interesting stuff going on in terms of the technology and in terms of the society. The Painter Society is kind of on the verge of the space race, so they're preparing at the beginning of the book to launch the first spaceship. There's loads of really interesting stuff going on in this book. I absolutely love the characters, Yumi and Painter, and I really enjoyed Akane and Tojin, and a couple of the other characters. I think it's Izzy and Mikasa. I'm terrible with names. Usually I'm quite good actually, but I'm terrible with names for these characters. Design plays is a large part of the story, and she's great in it. But yeah, so Yumi the Nightmare Painter. This thumbnail will say that there's no spoilers, but there is no spoilers here. I'm not going to talk very much around the rest of the book. Basically, at the beginning you learn a little bit about the characters' lives, then they start to intermingle, and then so in Your Name, if you've watched Your Name, you'll know this, but there's basically a longish montage. So what happens in Your Name is you see their lives, then you see them swap, then you see a montage of the days where they're learning to be each other. Sanderson doesn't do that. This book does take place over like 3 months or something, or I can't remember, 3 weeks maybe, a little longer. It takes place over a decent length of time, but he'll often go like, they spent the last so many days doing X, but you spend a lot of time in the learning to do each other's jobs section of the book. And I feel like if this had been a novella, and say it had been 200 pages instead of 300, and we had montaged some of that stuff and just stuck to the important bits, maybe the book would have been better. It's hard to say, because in those bits that are less... I'll start again. So in this middle section of the book, the problem they're trying to solve is that they have swapped. They don't know what they're working towards. They don't know who, say, for example, the antagonist is. They don't know, for example, why they have swapped. So the middle of the book feels very directionless. And it took me 3 days to read Yumi and the Nightmare Painter versus the 2 days it took me to read Tress. And I have to say, I think that was because of the lack of direction in the middle of the book. When I got to the end of the book and we got to the classic Sanderson Sanderlanche, I was all in and I read that in like an hour and a bit. Really, really loved that. I think the ending is one of the best endings he's done in a little while. I think better than the Lost Metal ending, and I think better than the endings for any of the Skyward books, except maybe Skyward actually had a really, really good ending. I think as I said before when I was talking about Tress, I think that Sanderson is trying to branch out a little and trying to make his writing a little... He's trying to work hard on writing in a slightly different way than his kind of workman-like prose that he's used in previous books. And I think it works well in Yumi and the Nightmare Painter. I think that his writing is good. I don't think it's written as well as Tress in terms of how he's adopting this kind of new style. This book is also narrated by Hoyd, but it feels like Sanderson forgets that for chapters at a time. In Tress, every few pages there's a comment from Hoyd about what's going on. But in in Yumi, you often see whole chapters go by, for example, where there's barely any discussion or barely any Hoyd chat. It's still very, very good, and I think that overall the ending is genuinely fantastic. As I said, loved the ending, and I loved. There are moments throughout the whole book that I really loved, but I think that I struggled a little bit in the middle with the what I felt to be a lack of direction. When you get to the end, it all makes sense and it all ties up. But going back to those sections and looking back on them, I still feel that lack of direction a little. The thing about those sections are clearly to build up the relationship, to build up the romance, the love between Yumi and Painter. But what I felt during those sections, even though they were really, really good, is, like I said, that lack of direction. It all ties up and it all works well in the end, and I feel like the ending being so good redeemed the directionless middle for me. I might be the only... I don't know whether I'm the only person who thinks this. I've only watched like one review of Yumi and the Nightmare Painter, which was Matt's Fantasy Book Reviews review, because he's really good at saying what he thinks about books without spoiling them. I actually think he hated this book, which is funny because I really liked it. And we often agree on most books, but I really like this one. So I ended up rating this one 4 out of 5. I think that Tress was better, although still 4 out of 5. I've said I probably would have rated that 4.5. I think Yumi the Nightmare Painter was not as good as Tress in terms of an overall whole. However, I did get the Sanderlanche goosebumps at the end of the book when things started to crescendo. And I liked the way it ended. I liked the epilogue. Lots and lots of good stuff in this book. And I really would like to see Yumi and Painter and other characters from this book in future Cosmere works. And I'd happily read a sequel to this book. And the same with Tress, actually. I think Tress is set up in a way that it could have an excellent sequel. Anyway. So, have you read Yumi and the Nightmare Painter? Look at the library fast track sticker on here. Have you read Yumi the Nightmare Painter? Did you like it? If you liked it or you didn't like it, let me know in the comments. If you liked this video, please give it a like. If you didn't like this video, then I'm open to all your constructive criticism. Please drop something in the comments below. We can have a chat, and I'd love to improve my videos so they're better for you, the audience. If you would like to see more Sanderson good stuff, Defiant is out tomorrow as I record this, and I will be reading and reviewing that on release. I'm also reading The Sunlit Man. The physical copy of that is not out for non-Kickstarterers, so I've had to resort to reading it on Kindle via the Kickstarter copy that I bought. What a shame. However, yeah, so if you're looking for my review for The Sunlit Man, that should be out sometime later this week, maybe. Thank you very much for watching. As I said, please subscribe for more Sanderson greatness. Look back in the archives. I've got a Sanderson playlist on the channel. You can read look at all the Sanderson stuff that I've reviewed. And maybe at some point I will do videos on what I think about previous Sanderson stuff that I read a couple of years ago. I don't want to do reviews for those because they're too far in the rearview mirror for me to remember the specifics. And as you've seen, sometimes I can forget the specifics for a book 3 days after I've read it. But maybe I'll do something on those books later in the year or next year. So if you've made it all the way through this video, thank you so much for watching. Thank you for keeping your eyes on the channel, as it were, and I will speak to you soon. I mistimed that point.